charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q, networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house from Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Good evening. Hello, everybody. Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radio Land and in internet world at home and abroad. This is the Global View on Q. It's the 46th Tuesday of 2022. It's about 8:10 p.m. in the studios at Q95. We have to apologize for the late start. Sometimes technology gets the better of you. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 15th November 2022. We're on the big station. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube. Follow us at Q95 FM Radio. Our website is www.q95da.com. So please share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews as it happens, when it happens, only on Q95, the big station. So because we love our nature isle Dominica, we're here tonight and we're continuing to move to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. With these timely topical issues and talking points that we're going to be looking at tonight. Let's get going. Is Dominica's democracy in peril? Is Dominica headed to being a one-party state? What is the history of one-party states in the region and farther afield? Are Dominicans' human rights and civil liberties under threat? Are Dominicans prepared to unite to fight to preserve their democracy with truly free and fair elections within a framework of modern electoral laws and campaign finance laws and regulations? Are all these things under threat from a snap election intended to avoid electoral reform recommendations paid for with over $650,000 of the people's money? Is that $650,000 now being thrown away? As we prepare to embrace our 45th anniversary of independence in 2023. Somebody's mic is open. Could you please close your mic so I don't get a feedback coming from your mic? Are we unifying our homeland around the preservation of our democracy, human rights and civil liberties with free and fair elections? My distinguished guest tonight, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, sociologist, Mr. Simeon Joseph, political scientist, Dr. Dion George, Attorney Gabriel Christian. Later on, we hope we may be joined by Bernardito, political leader of the Dominica Freedom Party. All these illustrious gentlemen who need absolutely no introduction will help us find some of the answers to some of these burning questions. We will discuss, as we always do, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous. No anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just simply bringing back civility, the caring society, and progressive economic and cultural practices, and recognizing the imperative for true resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So wherever you are, please call in, tell us how we can all take a stand to make a fresh start before the dawn of our 45th anniversary of independence in 2023 and build a modern society and economy in Dominica with work, good wages, wealth for every Dominican as our main goal. So stay with us in this space for another great debate. Get the answers to your questions and be part of the solution. Wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, your voices at home and abroad take priority again. As usual, call in, join the conversation. Tell us or you believe we can make a fresh start in embracing our 45th anniversary of independence. On this Global View on Q tonight, please have your seat as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, on the big station. So as usual, let's send a huge shout out all to and hugs and much love and appreciation and big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers. I'm sure doing their very best and often working under difficult conditions. We always like to acknowledge them. Please follow the correct advice, guidelines, and protocols. Be safe. Happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Again, thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air in crystal clear liquid stereo. Thank you, Lambi, on the console at Q95 tonight, directing the traffic. He will direct your calls to us a little later as he makes a terrific recovery from his recent health issues with a giant comeback on the controls. The people's voice is priority tonight. Lambi will take your calls. Let's get started. I go first to Justice Dr. Irvin Andre. I'll ask him to open his mic to give us his views from an historic and up to present day and how he sees the situation with the events leading up to these snap elections and other trends in Dominica. You get the first word, Dr. Andre. Let me go over to you now. We're not hearing you. Your mic is muted. You need to unmute your mic, Dr. Andre. So as soon as you can do that, you can just go right ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, very loud and very clear.
All right, wonderful. Very hungry too. But in any event, good evening to you all. Let me say a special good evening to our brother Lambi. It's good to see you alive and well. I always believe that there is great substance in the biblical verse relating to the young man called Lazarus. So again, Mr. Lazarus Lambi, good to see that you've made a full recovery. And I hope you can be with us doing human service in the studio as you've done before. Let me say good evening to your listeners, those who are listening with a good heart, and those who are listening with other intentions, so to speak. In a sense, it's good that we can gather on common ground, or should I say on sacred ground, to discuss in a very amiable fashion some of the issues that bedevil Dominica. On the other hand, it is probably unfortunate that we have to be discussing at this hour the state of the democracy in Dominica as it struggles for life and as it receives, as we used to say growing up, life water from patriots here and abroad. Sadly, democracy of free and fair elections in Dominica as we speak is an endangered species. It is unfortunately being preyed upon and being hounded by some of the very persons who have been given the sacred duty to protect it. As we speak, and in past election cycles, giant birds of prey have descended on Dominica, their talons extended in front of them, ready to land and to tear out chunks of flesh out of a vulnerable Dominica. And even as they do, other counterparts in close islands come to Dominica through the back door, aided and abetted by those who should uphold law and order in Dominica. And they land on the shores of Dominica, and some of them make their way, escorted and guarded by state law enforcement agents, their feet still wet from the sea, little Tululu crabs still clinging to their toes as they proceed to the voting booths and vote illegally. Illegally in the sense that, one, they have violated Dominica immigration laws to come to Dominica, and two, they violated Dominica's voting laws to participate in elections. And this is what we are looking at with this cynical and capricious decision or call to have an election on December the 6th, 2022. It comes on the very eve, or it coincides, I should say. The timelines of that. So Byron, and we'll talk about him, sent a letter to the leader the parliamentary leader of the opposition and to the Prime Minister, indicating his intention with respect to electoral reform. The first phase of his reform to be delivered on about January 23rd, the second in the spring, March or April 2023. And on the very evening of that declaration, a declaration which cost Dominicans $650,000, and coinciding with the effects or the damage caused by a tropical storm in the southeast of Dominica, we have this proclamation regarding an election on the same election list, with the same principles, with the same governing principles that other or previous elections had been done. So it seems to me that we're in a situation where it's deja vu all over again. We're going to have an election where persons from abroad who are violating, as I've already indicated, our electoral laws, spending which do not reflect any semblance of campaign finance reform, persons coming to Dominica, some illegally, some not, to vote, and then boldly walking away and leaving the prostrate, or should I say the immobile figure of democracy and good governance and the rule of law strangling on its own blood. The question is, what is the appropriate thing? Why have we come to this? We've come to this not because of a lack of knowledge, not because we don't know better, but precisely because we know better. Because as early as 2009, there was an ominous warning to the political directorate that your election legacy will be lost if electoral reform is instituted in Dominica. Can you believe that? And in 2013, you had a lawyer, I think her name is Mia Motley. I don't know exactly who she is, but Mia Motley. We paid her $50,000 to do a report on electoral reform. She did it. She reportedly made recommendations with respect to what all similar reports in the Eastern Caribbean have done. Point out the difficulties, point out the problems with unmitigated election spending by one side, with respect to the cleansing of the voters list, indicating that these are the principal types of reforms that can be regarded as reasonable or as honest or as bona fide. What happened to the $50,000 report? It went into the garbage. That is not the type of report that we need, according to the political directorate. And before the most recent election, the Organization of the American States, at the request of Dominica, proposed a set of recommendations. These recommendations were jettisoned and thrown into the garbage. And then in 2014, after the 2014 elections, you had a challenge to the constitutionality of certain, or whether certain types of conduct was criminal or otherwise, treating and bribery. And suffice it to say, the matter, or the political directorate, fought it to the CCJ, and the CCJ sent it back to the magistrate's court for the charges to be heard. And yet again, in a blatant and an egregious attempt to prevent true electoral reform, the lawyers of the Prime Minister recommended and directed the Director of Public Prosecution to nullipros those charges. It should not proceed. And this fits into a pattern. What happened to integrity of public office? The former head of it was replaced, and the first act of his replacement was to stop all kinds of inquiries into the income of members of the government, and whether that income was consistent with their known means of livelihood. And in the most cynical fashion, on June 6, 2022, the CCJ again had occasion to reflect on the elections of Dominica. It ruled essentially with respect to a challenge on whether a decision by the first court of first instance, whether that decision was a final or interlocutory or interim, to use a simple word. And the court held that, in fact, it was an interlocutory. There is cause to disagree or reasons to disagree with that decision, but that's not the point. What was significant is the comment made by the CCJ. I should say the comments, clearly indicating that based on the record before it, the elections in 2019 were tainted, and Dominica should not embark on another electoral ride with those taints still in existence. And the fact of the matter is, those taints are still in existence. So that is where we are. We've forced ourselves into a corner where we are now known regionally and internationally as the country which, in open defiance of the rule of law, of regional voices expressing concerns about what's happening in Dominica, about persons being disenfranchised, about Dominicans abroad, some, not all, having no qualms, about driving a dagger in the heart of democracy and the rule of law in Dominica. Yet again, we are faced with an impending election which seemed on its face to breach all norms of decency, of integrity, of compliance with the rule of law, thereby relegating Dominica to the status of pariah state. And this is where we are. And even while Rome, or should I say that in terms of integrity in elections, burns to the ground, there is a serious debate on the ground as to whether or not forces seeking democratic change in Dominica should participate. It is somewhat amazing. It is said over and over again that the election may be immoral, but it's not unlawful. Suffice it to say that I take a fundamentally different view. How can you describe, or how can you suggest that an election where the voters list has more persons, more voters than the population, the resident population of Dominica, how can you describe an election based on such a list as being lawful or not unlawful? How can you describe an election where persons are taking Peepwee and Canoe from Guadeloupe and Martinique and other adjoining nearby islands to come without any clearance from immigration and are escorted, if my reports based on the last elections are true, to the polls in open violation of Dominica's laws? How can you even suggest for 1 minute that that is a lawful elections, for God's sakes? How can you suggest an election based on hundreds of Dominicans? In the last election, there were 19 planes, unprecedented in Dominica's history, on the tarmac on election day at what's the name of the airport? Douglas Charles Airport. On election day. And what is worse, these persons, I should say, I'm sorry, were strategically directed to vote in particular constituencies, despite the fact that they did not meet the residential requirements to vote in that particular constituency. How can you for 1 second suggest implicitly or otherwise that that election is lawful? Only in Dominica. It wouldn't happen in the very countries where these people are coming from. And it leaves the questions. Nupamun too? Shouldn't we be governed by the rule of law as everybody else? Should we not have free and fair elections? Why should the vote of persons who've resided in Dominica, who have to deal with the tribulations in Dominica, who have to deal with the shortages, who have to deal with the rising prices, who have to deal and contend with the persecution, the ostracism, why should their vote not count? Not have the same weight as it would have if it was based on a cleansed voters list, where it's only those persons eligible to vote would vote. So make no bones about this. This is not just an immoral election, it's an illegal election. And that is why there is a haste to have it on about December 6th, before the institution of any meaningful reforms which Sir Byron may have proposed. How many reports do we need to tell us what is right? There was a consultation among community groups in Dominica led by Pastor Rodney and his group before the elections. Is something wrong with their report also? What do we need? Do we need a white dove from heaven to come and tell us what elections should look like? We know exactly what it means. But if the purpose is to perpetuate oneself in power, then everything that has happened in the past makes sense. It makes sense because it has nothing to do with the free and fair elections mandate that we should have as a community. That is the problem. What do we do? Some ask, what do we have in place? Well, the Dominican people have to put something in place because after all, it is in their hands. I say on behalf of free and fair elections, in your hands. And when I say in your hands, in the hands of the people of Dominica, I commend thy spirit. It is up to the Dominican people to remedy this wrong, this blatant wrong. There are means to remedy it. I am not going to get at this particular juncture, get into a debate about what is the most efficacious means. I know that there's been talk about the persons who the Prime Minister has jettisoned should come together, bring out a vote of no confidence. There is no air of reality to that suggestion. Who's going to bring that vote of no confidence? Kasa. Which president is going to say, okay, guys, I agree with you all. I'm going to select one of you to be interim leader. Are you dreaming in Technicolor? The people, Dominican people, those who cherish free and fair elections, those who cherish a future Dominica where they can return, those who cherish a Dominica where their children can return, will decide what is the appropriate means of action to remedy this blatant assault on their very way of life and on the very way and manner in which they govern themselves. Any talk of constitutional reform at this point, quite frankly, in my respect for you, is meaningless, because the question is, who is going to institute those reforms? Which parliament? Who is going to do it? Considering the unmitigated, the uncontradicted, the clear evidence as to exactly why elections fall short of the mark in Dominica. Look at St. Lucia. Look at Barbados. Look at Grenada. Look at St. Kitts. They have all had elections, and they've all had the freedom to vote their consciences, that is to say, those who can vote. And they've all been able peacefully to change their governments as their collective right to do so. Do we have that right? If we don't, then why? I'll stop at this point.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andre. And Gabriel, Christian, good to see you. I want to go over to you now because You've been talking a lot about this. You make a lot of observations. You've been in many different groups and on forums, and you've been talking. I know that you've been very concerned, and you've made your concerns very clear on the air. But as I go over to you, I just want to bring back what Irving said about this email. Remember this famous email, and the reason why I think it's important because that email, which said, "Bro, please do not drift too far. I tried calling you again today and just cannot get through. I spoke to Kandwani this morning. There is madness going on at the commission, that's the Electoral Commission. You need to call in Richard and Kandwani. I leave today. These guys are talking about reforms. Reforms. They're talking about reforms to include ID cards and complete re-registration. Such reforms will undermine your re-election legacy, as the opposition will say, look, the commission agreed with us, reform was required because of widespread fraud. That email was sent to, I believe, addressed to the Prime Minister Roosevelt, carried by Attorney Anthony Astafan and copied to Mr. Alec Lawrence, and it was on the check the date, it was March 27, 2008 at 10:27 a.m. So here's the thing, Gabriel Christian. You can see the problem that we have now is nothing new. Since March of 2008, the Electoral Commission was trying to undertake those reforms and to implement reforms. This is the email that stopped them, because you remember what happened. 2 of the members of the commission were changed and 2 attorneys were put in their place. And since that time, Dominica has been struggling to get those reforms. As Dr. Andre was saying, Mia Motley did a report. We have so many people, but we just cannot. Are we surprised, therefore, that on the eve of this report coming from Sir Dennis Byron, we get a snap election being called? Obviously, to avoid the implementation of those reforms for the same reason that was stated in that email. It will ruin your election winning legacy. Gabriel, you're a brighter fellow than me. Tell us more about that. You want to open your mic? It's muted. Unmute your mic, Gabriel, so that we can hear you.
Blessed good evening, Mr. G.
Good evening, Gabriel.
Blessed good evening, Brother Lammy, Brother Irving, Brother Dion, Brother Simeon. My beloved people, what Brother Sheridan has just outlined represents the ideological deformation and the debasement of any adherence to law, ethical grounding, and morality of Anthony Astafan. Anthony Astafan has not found one instance of misconduct by Roosevelt Skerrit that he has ever come out in public condemned as unacceptable. And when in that supposed email that he allegedly penned, he talks about the Electoral Commission and madness taking place there, he was trying to ensure that that commission was castrated in a fashion to ensure the continued existence of a regime that would disregard all laws. Let me just say this. We are at the 11th hour and we are in a dictatorship. Why do I say this? Well, we're in a dictatorship when the institutions of state have been corrupted. How have they been corrupted? You've had acting police inspectors, later confirmed as police inspectors, on public airwaves supporting the government in violation of the general orders. You've had the director of audit of this country. We all know who he is, on public airwaves, defending the government tooth and nail instead of doing his job as the Auditor General to ensure that the books were in order. You've had a police service where I'm reliably informed in the kidnapping of Mr. Choksi, senior police officers were seen at or about the place where the gentleman was disembarked upon our shores, battered and bruised. That's now under investigation. A police service in which officers are appointed in a fashion that speaks to their loyalty to the ruling party, not their loyalty to law. We have a civil service, with civil servants in high office go about in the color red, the color of the ruling party. Because if you're not red, you're dead. Dead in way of advancement in the service. Dead in way of opportunities to go to further education. Dead in way of salary increases or benefits. We have a healthcare service. We're Dominican doctors. We know who they are. If they do not support the government, they're denied privileges to serve our people, while people who can hardly speak the English language are allowed access to our national hospital. That's the kind of country we have. And then we have a prime minister who, in stark abuse of authority, said in public that no law, no constitution could prevent him from doing what he wanted to do. Well, in 1215, ladies and gentlemen, my beloved Dominicans, listen carefully. In 1215, in England, the Magna Carta Charter was issued to bridle the excesses of the king and gave power to the barons to interrupt his reign and to do that forcefully where he broke the law. Let me repeat. In 1215, the Magna Carta, which is the basis for our Constitution in philosophy, the basis for the US Constitution, and the basis for the laws we inherited from Britain, gave the barons the right to bridle the power of the king and to do so by force if necessary, where he abused his power. Dominicans believe that we are a Christian country. I still believe that the majority of Dominicans are Catholic. The Dominican priest, and when I say Dominican priest here, I don't mean as in born in Dominica. He was Italian. His name was Thomas Aquinas. He wrote about the right of a people to rebel against tyranny. In his thesis, the Summa Theologica, he said, human beings have a right to rebellion against tyranny where that tyrant abridges their rights. He also said it is the tyrant, rather, who is guilty of sedition, not the citizen, since the tyrant encourages discord and sedition among his subjects, that he may lord over them more securely. For when someone lords over his citizens, he indeed has become a tyrant. And where a person in leadership has placed his personal interest over the public good and has done injury to a people, the people have a right to engage in rebellion. Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican theologian or priest. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 and died in 1274.
I know him very well.
Well, thank you, Dion.
Yes.
I am not sure you're that old, but if you say you met him, then you may.
Well, I've never met him, but I studied him.
My friend Dion George, my friend Simeon Joseph, my brother Irvin Andre, and friend, all of us here, Dominicans, we have gotten to a place where Roosevelt's carrot, aided and abetted by Tony Astafan and other persons known and unknown, have created a dictatorship by ensuring that rule of law does not exist. Why do I say this? Rule of law does not exist when you say so. It wasn't I. It wasn't Irving. It wasn't Simeon. It wasn't Dion or Mr. G or Mr. Brother Lambie who said no law, no constitution. It was him. On that basis alone, he made himself ineligible because he made manifest in word a willingness to abuse the laws of the land. And Dominicans are still sitting down after he uttered those words when he stood for office in violation of law, because he knew that he was a French citizen, or should have known. And so we've gotten ourselves in Dominica in a place where the institutions of state, the police service, have been abused, manhandled, mishandled. There are police officers who are good and decent men, but the force has been used as a militia to coerce, intimidate, and corral our people. civil service, abused, harassed, and intimidated, misused as an instrument of raw power. And then you've had a government that has amassed the largest war chest in the history of our country. Billions of dollars outside in offshore accounts in violation of the Procurement Act, of the Finance Act, and billions of dollars spent in violation of our Procurement Act, where contracts are given to friends and family. When you have that collection of what I call dictatorial characteristics, you are indeed in a dictatorship. And when a people who've waited for and asked for electoral reform are reliably informed that Tony Estefan made utterances to the CCJ that electoral reform was on the way. And shortly after the election of 2019, as Brother Irving said, Mr. Byron was retained. And in the midst of his process, interrupted in an election called, we know that Roosevelt Skerrit has made manifest a desire to remain in power at the expense of the Dominican people. And so I address now the following persons. The Church Council, what say you? The Dominican Bar Association, what say you? The Dominican Medical Society, what say you? The Dominican Association of Industry and Commerce, what say you? Is there a Dominican Employers Federation still? Are you there? What say you? The Dominican National Youth Council, what say you? Is there a Dominican Federation of Students, a grouping of students? We're fighting for you. You are the ones who are unemployed or unemployable, who have to leave the beloved island that we all love and scramble overseas, take canoes to the French islands, go to St. Martin, try to get through the back door, because the society has been perverted to the use of one man, his family, and his cronies. What say you, young people? Are you satisfied? Are you satisfied with the Dominica that you have today? Where to really make any progress, you have to subject yourself to sexual abuse, to be manipulated, to come into circuses where you're given strong drink and made to blow a red horn and wear a red hat and a red shirt and jump up and down and playing the fool, where you've been subjected to the practice of the cool out, that you have to accept bribes. Is this a society that you want to live in? Well, all of these organizations and all of those persons who knew better should have done better, but it's not too late. Dearly beloved, verily I say unto you, the country we have is but a reflection of your willingness or unwillingness to stand for what is right. We were taught as children on Dominica that honesty was the best policy. And so, if we are unable to be honest with ourselves, if we are unable to call a spade, if we are unable to call wrong by its name, if we are able instead to enable crime, able instead to turn our blind eye to the misdeeds done in our name, then we are deserving of every malediction that comes our way. And I'll close by saying this. Dominica is not a simple island. I've always been of the belief that Dominica is a very spiritual country. That Dominica itself that I grew up in is actually a living, breathing being. And when he took his stand on November 6, 2022, the very earth began to shake beneath his feet. I believe that there is a spiritual element to all of this. I believe that man proposes and God disposes. I believe that what we see in the earthquakes and the floods and the landslides are a condemnation of the heavens because he has lost the mandate of heaven. The bright young man, handsome, tall, and charismatic, who came onto the stage after the sudden and unusual deaths of two prime ministers with a lot of promise, has squandered it all. He has squandered it all by chasing after the finer things in life and a $64,000 mansion on a hill, while the country suffers and descends into greater poverty, greater hardship, greater difficulty, and he turns the blind eye of a tyrant to all of this. And the country now itself The very soil beneath the feet of Dominicans is shuddering and shaking, and the country is speaking. Dominicans, will you listen?
Gabriel, thanks a lot for that. Because we're moving along quite nicely. You know, Simeon, I must tell you that I really appreciated the contributions of Dr. Irving Andre and Gabriel Christian so far. I know that you, as usual, you will move us with all of what you're going to say. And I know Dion George is coming right after you. But I want to just ask you to start off, Simeon, by telling us, answer the question that Gabriel put to us and to the people out there. He said he was talking to the people out there. You remember we talked about 1979, all the groups that Gabriel spoke about, the Chamber of Commerce, the Employees Federation, the National Youth Council, the churches, all of these community groups, it's the civil association, civil groups and political parties. Everybody came together. Gabriel is asking now, the kind of society he described, the way all these institutions of government have been corrupted, and as he said, he didn't use the word défoncé, but I think he meant something like that, right? They're not functional. The IPO, where is it? You know, where is the police commission? Where is the public service commission? Where are all those institutions? So he's asking, do you think these people want to live in that kind of society, or can they develop a resolve to fix it and make it better? Over to you, Cynthia.
Good evening, everyone. You know, after listening to Dr. Andre and Gabriel, and, you know, a lot of, how you call it, writers and thinkers come to mind, you know. I think of Plato. I'm not sure if people, those who have done philosophy, Plato, who wrote The Great Republic, and other people like James Baldwin, and theologians like Fulton Sheen. Just listening to Gabriel and Dr. Andre and thinking of all what is being said tonight, I am being drawn back to these references of wisdom. You know, it was James Baldwin who said, ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. Ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. We are in a state now where when you have looked at what has happened this past few days, one word that comes to mind very strongly is injustice. Injustice because on the 6th of November, I think one of the greatest injustices that was ever been manifested on the people of Dominica, while people were not sure if their loved ones were alive, when roads were blocked, when bridges were seemingly washed away, when loved ones were not sure if their families were alive, when people were being seemingly covered in landslides, when people who did not have lights and water and were not even sure whether their family members were alive. A great injustice was thrust on the people of Dominica in the midst of that darkness and storm and turmoil by a prime minister who decided that he had to use power based on the ignorance of what real power is to take a decision that manifests a certain hostility against Dominicans. And that is why James Baldwin comes to mind, because it cannot be wisdom that causes that to happen. That has been derived from a very high level of ignorance, of not knowing what power is and how to use power for you to empower people. And that is where the injustice has happened. And allow me, Mr. Gregoire, to think of Plato. Plato in the Great Republic said, the measure of a man is what he does with power. The measure of a man is what he does with power. When you are emboldened with power, what do you use power for? Do you use power to dominate? Do you use power to undermine? Do you use power as a means of trying to usurp people's stability? So that's why Plato comes to mind. And I'm speaking, and so many phrases are just coming to mind as I speak to you. I'm not sure if Dr. Andre is familiar with this Latin phrase, prudentia phronesis. Okay? Right? Prudentia phronesis. I remember when I was doing theology and I was studying the legal aspects of St. Thomas Aquinas and those kind of people there. That phrase comes to mind. It says, with power, you have to have wisdom. Wisdom works in tandem with power. If you have power and you do not use wisdom properly, you will misuse power. And so that is why Prudentia phronesis says practical wisdom is not opportunistic judgment. Okay? Wise judgment must be relative to constraint. And so we have seen repeatedly over and over again unwise decisions being enacted on the people of Dominica, where you find that this prudentia phronesis, this practical wisdom is not being used, but power is being used as a means of opportunism to take advantage of people when they are weak without restraint. And so I would like to say that once you have very little principles, when someone has very little principles, it's all about power and manipulation and spectacle and image. People who do not use power with wisdom become people without principle. And if you do not have principle with power, you will use power to manipulate, as we have seen. Power will become a spectacle, as we are seeing. And you will all be about creating an image, which unfortunately is what our politics has come to nowadays. Spectacle, imagery. Because the absence of practical wisdom leads to opportunistic judgment, where you use that power and you use that opportunistic judgment you have in the wrong way, not to empower people, but to use that power you have as a means of being non-pragmatic, without realizing that pragmatism cannot be mixed with opportunism. And that is why when people think that they have to idolize, and they have to elevate the leader of the Dominica Labour Party, the Prime Minister of Dominica, because they say he's so pragmatic, he's so strategic, he catches people with his pants down. No, this is the absence of pragmatism that is mixed with opportunism. When you see an opportunity to use your power in a destructive way, so you use it. And so between I'm coming to your question. So between the government that we have, which does evil, and the people in the public service, in the police, in the church, as Gabriel said, among the young people who accept it, according to Victor Hugo, which I'm sure Gabriel can identify with, it's a shameful solidarity. It's a shameful solidarity when people who know different, who are supposed to articulate something different, will collude with a government to accept the fact that people have to use the power that they have, okay, as a means of opportunism. And that leads us to another saying by Frederick Bastiat, one of the other early writers of the Middle Ages, who says, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in society, over the course of time, they create themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. So when you see, for instance, people saying that the prime minister has the legal means to call an election, that the constitution empowers him, or for instance, that the electoral laws of Dominica gives him the authority to call an election when he wants. This strikes at the heart of people who take advantage of a legal system that authorizes plunder and turns our moral code of existence upside down so that they glorify it. And that is where we are at in Dominica today. And I'd like to join in closing. I want to say it now, and I'll say it in closing again, that it is ironical and it's also paradoxical that on the night of the calling of an election, Dominica was under a storm. But I want to send out an alert tonight. And I want to say this, Mr. G. This is what I want to say. That, and I'm not intending to be prophetic or anything, but those of us with religious beliefs will know that one of the guiding principles of Scripture is this: that we have been reminded in Scripture over and over and over through the story of the Hebrew people, through the story of the early Christians, and most specifically through the pericope, so to speak, in theological terms, of the book of Revelation, that when people refuse to listen to the voice of God, eventually he forces them to turn to him. And what I want to say is this: I am one person who has never taken all the disasters that have befallen on Dominica casually. And why I say that? I'm saying this, that God has realized for some time that we in Dominica have traded off good for evil. That we in Dominica have traded off lies for falsehood. That we in Dominica have turned good into evil. That we find our government system, our churches, our leading business community, all of these people are sending the message that what is evil and sinful and unholy is good. That we have glorified and turned the 10 Commandments on its head. Thou shalt not lie. And we have Christians who clap when they're being told lies in their faces. We have a sort of idolatry, a kind of human idolatry that is happening now by people who go to church. The first commandment says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And we find that there are people in Dominica who are making the prime minister and certain politicians their God. There's in the 10 Commandments where it says, thou shalt not make any graven images unto me. And that's what people are doing. And I am saying as a warning that all the disasters we have had over the past time is God who has been warning us and telling us, cautioning us to turn back to him. He has given us several warnings over the years, over the past 10 years, where he see where we have been going. And he has been telling us, I am giving you warnings, my dear people, that if you do not turn from your wicked ways, I will make myself known. And so the 6th of December and the 18th of November is the final call for Dominicans to choose which side are they on. Because in the book of Revelation, we were told that you are either hot or cold. And if you are hot, if you are lukewarm, I will spit you out. Dominica is the land of the Lord. Dominica professes to be a Christian country. Our religious leaders have been silent while they allow that level of idolatry and debauchery and all kinds of non-Christian and anti-biblical principles to dominate the land. And God is telling us, come December 6th, if you all once again choose to put evil on the throne, to put lies on the throne, to put deception on the throne, to glorify corruption and deception and adultery, the next destruction that is to come, you all will not be able to stomach it, because then I will show you who I am. You who am given a chance 3 times to show me whom do you serve. When this time comes around and we show him again that we are not serving him, we have chosen instead to serve Mammon, he will show us who he truly is. Through my voice this evening, I want to send that to Dominican. So the public servants, that's to answer your question from the beginning, the churches, the business sectors, the youth, the employers federations, the media people, the government workers, the policemen, the firemen, the nurses who think that this anarchy of dishonesty and tyranny that is happening in Dominica is going to cause us to be fruitful and bountiful, we better be warned, because God is maybe giving us a last chance to reject evil, to choose good, so that we can live.
Thank you, Brother Simeon. And as you said quite eloquently, I mean, the good Lord said, those who do not hear his voice will feel his wrath. He always told us that when you're growing up, if you can't hear, you'll feel. Right? That's what they told us when we were growing up. If you cannot hear, you'll feel. Okay? Yep. So I want to go over to Dr. Dion George, and right after Dr. Dion George, I will go over to Lambi, because I know that we want to take the people's calls, and then we're going to go back to after that to Dr. Andre, because we have to get into the meat. You see where we left off with Simeon, and we've set the tone now for us to look at the whole question of the significance of the snap election. Is it moral? Is it unlawful? I think Dr. Andre had a say about that. We need to go back to that, and then the question is, how should Dominicans respond? And why should citizens be concerned about it? How should they respond? I think this is where we get into with this. Dr. Andre started guiding us very nicely on the loan, but we will discuss that, because that is the question at hand. And Simeon has told us, Dion George, that is, we have a last chance to right the wrong, to take heed. These messages, warnings, painted for us there in vivid color, but we're not listening. We're ignoring it. It says that people are lying to us to office, and we're clapping as though we don't know better, whether we're men or women of the cloth or not. Dr. Dion George, let's go over to you to put all of this in perspective for us. Before we go over to Lambi, stand by, because we're going to go to you after Dr. George to take the people's calls. Over to you, Dr. George.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'm going to read a book that was given to me by one of my best friends. Her name is Evadne George. She has passed away. May her soul rest in peace. May all the souls of the faithful departed rest in peace. This scripture is taken from Psalms chapter 27. It's from verse 2 to verse 4. Very short. It says, when evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my foes, they shall stumble and fall. Though an enemy encamps me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, yet I shall be confident. So I say that as my beginning statement to tell you, I won't give any philosophical statement tonight. Typically, I believe there is meaning in theory, because within theory, you can create a framework. But tonight, I want to get to according to you, the meat of the issue. And I thank, and let me just say good night to Lambi. I love you. When I say I love you, I mean that as a very deep part of it. And respect to all my panelists, and good night to the people of Salisbury and Dominica by large, and good night to all the listeners. So let me get right into the issue of what is at hand. From what I understand, the eastward hand is the significance of the snap election. And I won't give any philosophical or theoretical statement about it. I'll get right into it. So I have some statements here within. I said to myself, let me explore the statement of the Prime Minister. I said, let me explore why a hurry snap election. Why before the implementation of the electoral reform of Sir Dennis Byron? And I also said, perhaps I can consider what is some recommendations as to why would persons do that and what can the people do. These are what I want to touch on in 10 minutes, if I am allowed that time. Question number one, the significance of the snap election. I think that's the main issue tonight, and I think that's what the public is waiting to hear, and that's what they want to discuss, period. Why would the Prime Minister do that? I speak not representing any organization except perhaps I'm a member of Nitcliffe, but I do not speak on behalf of Nitcliffe tonight. I speak as myself. When a Prime Minister in a country calls a snap election, there are two reasons why that is possible. There could be internal reasons and there could be external reasons. Internal reasons being that there could be internal fighting. There could be fighting within members of parliament, members of his core or her core, and they decide they want a reshuffle. I've heard a good story, and I laughed when I was doing my PhD, when one time Eric Williams, and I respect Eric Williams, I say that full-heartedly, said, perhaps he should resign. And he asked his parliament, should he resign? And those who said he should resign, he fired all of them. Every single one. And so I don't know if there's some internal fighting there. That is left to be seen. Perhaps there is some sort of strategic appointing to move forward of the persons who have agreed to resign. I don't know. So we only expect the why question has always been a very deep question because we are speculating. And so that's on the internal side. The external side, it could be positive or negative. Perhaps there are people who want the Prime Minister to move forward and to capture the next 4 or 5 years, and they want to solidify it right now because they suspect the opposition forces are in some sort of weakness position. Or perhaps there is pressure, I don't know, from outside forces that may say that there are some things that are not legal, and perhaps there's a need to organize quickly to perhaps get some legitimacy for the next few years. We don't know. But these are questions that I believe that the public should ask. So I thought that was very prudent to ask those questions. The other thing I think that is important is, and I've heard people ask it, and I think it's a fair thing on this program. And by the way, I want to give kudos to Sheridan Gregoire for having this program. You know, whether or not this election is legal or whether it's not illegal, and people are sensitive, people are sensitized, people are excited. And so the question becomes, how can he do that? Can the Prime Minister do that? People are wondering what is going on. Well, I mean, we have had a lot of educational programs where we have literally verbatim quoted the Constitution that deals with election laws. And so we're not going to repeat that. We have done that already. And I thank QFM for that. The idea here is a general question, as in whether it's legal. I mean, I have an attorney here on the panel, and I also have a renowned judge that can question and interrogate my statement. The answer is within the council of the Constitution, yes, the Prime Minister can call election when he wants. In fact, I will share with you right now, I have heard pundits said that that the UWP had called an early election, and to use the words of the Prime Minister, it caught them with their pandang, that they call it early and they lost. And the person said, why are you being so hypocritical about an early call? I am one who like to put things in context. And my view is, and that's just my view, and I think we can agree to disagree without any bitterness. At the time, of course, people do things for their own benefit. And if the Prime Minister thinks now is the right time, he can. But when the UWP called the election early, the songs that they were playing was Workers' Cafe Bagay 2 They were confident that they would win because they felt that they have delivered a mandate and implemented policies that were successful. This time is a different situation. The issue that I have and the question that I pose is it legal? I said within the framework of the Constitution, the Prime Minister can call the election. That is true. However, the highest court in the region have said in a judgment that Dominica should not have a next election without implementing these certain electoral reforms, which includes, one, how can a country have an election where the people on the voters list is more than the population? I tell that to my Grenadian friends that I went to college with, and they laugh. They laugh. They laugh that the electoral list is higher than the population of Dominica right now. So clearly we need a cleansing of the electoral list. The other thing is people from overseas. Now, we have had, a litany, a plethora of shows where we have talked about these things, and I do not want to go back and bring it up. But the essence here is this, that persons who have expired their stay or the overseas after 5 years, they are not eligible to vote. And that should be implemented. We need a re-registration. We need voters' ID. And so these are some of the things that are pertinent to the discussion we are having. Finally, what I would say is what can happen and what should happen. Well, everybody's saying, well, first of all, I think I deal with the idea of perhaps why he's doing that. Why is that happening? But I forget something, I had to talk about how can someone do that, but I'll come back to that later. But let me just deal with some of the basic recommendations for how to deal with such a situation. One, file an injunction. File an injunction, not to go against governance, is because we want good governance. We want to preserve democracy. We want a country where the people, if they said almost half, or let's say 40-something% of the people had voted for UWP, let them be satisfied that this election is a fair one. That when they're ready, that they would have elections. File an injunction to stop it. Some say, oh, nothing would happen. They would still go ahead. No, that's not true. I'll tell you what would happen. It would slow it down. They would have to hear the case. I don't know how things work. I'm not an attorney, and perhaps an attorney can call after you give Lambie the call. But I really believe that there can be some sort of judicial review to say that several matters would concur with stopping it. For example, the disaster on the East. That could be a state of emergency. The concern that the Electoral Commission is going through some sort of dysfunction, and potentially more salient, the idea that the reforms has not been implemented. I think these are very strong standing grounds And it doesn't go against the prime minister. If I am the prime minister, I would say, you know what? I'm very confident. My record speaks for itself. And you know what? Let's have the reforms. Let's have it. And after we have it, if I win, I hope you have nothing to say. Well, let's do that then. Well, I heard about an email that they said, no, man, if you do that, you might be in a problem here. So we're talking about the fairness of the election. That's number one. So I say, let's do an injunction. The other thing, which I cannot publicly propose civil disobedience, but as a scientist, I understand that there are different ways that government works. And there is the elitist theory that people with money will make decisions. There's the bureaucratic theory that people with power in office will make decisions. And there are other theories, but one of the theories is the social movement theory, which states that where people do not get decisions, they act. And they can act in several ways. And I can talk about it very extensively, where they can protest, which is part of their right. But I must say a key word though, is peacefully protest. But you know, sometimes when that happens, you know, you plan something, it doesn't always happen that way. And then things get in chaos. But sometimes that's what brings change. And the other thing I would suggest, not as a recommendation, but as a scientist looking at it and looking at how countries have worked before, and I can give several examples if you can allow me to, is the idea that the opposition forces can form a coalition. Now, I will share with you that there is this view in politics that coalition do not last. The idea here is not for coalition to last. The idea here is to get an objective. And so the idea here is for coalitions to come together, and if they decide they're not participating, don't participate. Granted, third parties plays a role, and that's my last point, sir. Third parties plays a role. And third parties can bring up ideas that other parties do not have. But if a third party join to legitimize the ongoing election when other third parties and the main opposition party is trying to collide, I think that's a betrayal to the country. I think it's Barack Obama called it a red line. It's a red line. It's not impossible for the prime minister if he can understand that the media is really the watchdog of the nation, that we are not criticizing him or the party, that we are saying that we stand for democracy, we stand for good governance, and we stand for the rule of law. And put back the election, allowing the reforms to go through, and then contest it party to party, man to man, with all your confidence. So I will stop on that point.
Thank you, Dion. Appreciate that. Question is how to stop it. How does it stop? We're going to come to that. I mean, I'm sure people will have their suggestions and their recommendations. You started talking about collaborations and collisions. I see some of that happening. Let us hope it works. Let us hope people can, do some magic, be together and do something. I mean, let me just welcome Bernard, who's just joined us now. But I just wanted to go over to Lambi, as we said. I'll come back to Bernard afterwards. But Lambi, we give the people the numbers, and I think they might want to join us. We started a bit late, so let's give them an opportunity, see if they need to make some calls, and then we'll go over back to, we'll just open the floor after that. We'll want to give Bernard a couple of minutes, and then we'll open the floor so everyone from Dr. Andre and so on, and we don't have that much time left. Lambi, over to you.
Mr. Greg, we have a keen question to Dr. Andre. And or Gable, but Dr. Andrew has been the judge. I remember when the CCJ handed down its decision, okay? In the summary statement at the end of the decision, in bold. There was a statement made that general elections in Dominica ought not to be conducted under the current conditions. I'm not a lawyer, but isn't this some form of legal precedence or legal directives that can be grounds for filing some intervention of some sorts against this election? Because the CCJ, it was in their final decision that they handed down, although they said they would ought. Okay, now I know in law it says shall is what is imperative, but what is your take on that? I don't know.
Yeah, my take is very simple. Now, from a strictly legal perspective, that comment by the CCJ is what lawyers call obiter. That is to say, it is a comment which is not directly related to the essential issue which was before the court. And the issue before the court was whether the decision by what his name is, Glasgow, whether it was a final or an interim decision. The CCJ decided it was an interim decision, not final, and therefore not appealable. Again, as I said, to be quite frankly, I would argue that is a very strictly legalistic, narrow interpretation of what is final. Because if a decision in effect stops an action, then what more final do you want, Nagaso? Huh? Final has to be given, in my respectful view, its ordinary meaning within the context of the application. But that is for another day.
Okay. Yeah.
It is unprecedented, Mr. Joseph, for a court to go out of its way to make a pronouncement in a judicial decision,
right,
to the effect that based on the evidentiary record before it, it is clear that, and I'm paraphrasing what the court said, it is clear that the elections were tainted.
Right.
They broke some of the very legislation which was supposed to govern elections in Dominica.
Right.
And that is why these fellas were jumping up like little sukuyans when the court made its decision. Because it went beyond the bounds, beyond the boundary of what, for example, the OECS Court of Appeal would say. Because the OECS Court of Appeal maintained, one can argue, a hands-off attitudes to those kinds of issues. In fact, there's a perception among many scholars and lawyers that as a general proposition, the OECS will not interfere in elections once they are done, except or absent exceptional circumstances. And that is one of the arguments against the suggestion that an injunction should be brought after the fact. We have the evidence. They don't want to interfere, Gasson. They don't want to overthrow or set aside an incumbent government. You see what I'm saying? But lawyers are trained to break new ground.
Right. To establish jurisprudence.
To establish a precedent. That is precisely the point. One lawyer told me, boy, if an injunction is brought before the election, the judge will be upset with you. I mean, are you kidding me?
No, man, that's a landmark.
Are you kidding me? So you were there to please the judge? Huh?
Because
what are we
political appointees.
That's right. Well, I could spend a whole session on that. And
well,
you made your biblical.
Who's been selling passports and is an ambassador to a European country.
But as you say, we should not be worshiping the god of Mammon.
Yeah.
And in extension of the allusions to the biblical thing, we cannot expect a conversion on the road to Damascus in terms of the political directorate. We cannot expect them to change their ways. Remember one of Michael Jackson's son? Past is precedent. We know why there is this perversion of the rule of law insofar as it relates to elections. Bread, the god of Mammon. We're not satisfied with what we have. We have to take more because we have to be dressed in Gucci and Versace and air-conditioned SUVs at taxpayers' expense.
Starts in 30
That
minutes.
is what we worship. You referred to James Baldwin. I'm very familiar with his words. You'll also know that he wrote a book, a long essay called The Fire Next Time, when he predicted a racial conflagration if inequality continued to rule the American landscape. And we have to think of that in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and what happened to George Floyd in the year 2000 or 2000. Is it 2000? 2020, I'm sorry. You know, so the writing is on the wall. You've exposed it. You've talked about it. I am not a biblical scholar, but what more evidence do we need that things are marching towards a denouement that will be very detrimental to Dominicans on the ground, not those who, like giant birds of prey, descend on Dominica, not those who come through the back door to cast a vote and to take off and leave Dominicans suffering without any stimulus package, while the French and the Americans give out stimulus packages to their people. But those who remain on the ground, those who are guaye in, to use a nice English word, for God's sakes, that it is why this is so imperative. That is why Dominicans have to face this thing square on.
Well, that is what we're going to get to in a minute. And Gable, you wanted to make a contribution to the question that was raised by Simeon Joseph.
Yes, we learned it as dicta. They didn't tell us so much in U.S. law schools about obiter, but it's obiter dicta. And we're referring to the CCJ's comment on the election. And it's a comment or suggestion, observation by a judge in an opinion that's not necessary to resolve the case. And as such, it is not legally binding on other courts. But it still, however, may be cited as persuasive authority in future litigation. And that's what the learned judge was getting to. And that's why we believed, despite the fact that some of our colleagues on the ground thought differently, that it was important to do what Brother Dion called make a landmark statement. The British common law, which is what the American common law and the Dominican common law and all Caribbean, this British West Indian common law comes from, is ever evolving. I made the point that there was Dred Scott, which said that a black man had no right that a white man was bound to respect, 1857. And then about 100 years later, you had Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated U.S. society, starting with schools. And so by doing a motion for injunctive relief, even though Irving has put his finger on the hesitance that might be at the OECS Court of Appeals, that could have been used in dicta, but can also be used later on as well. But right now, Irving talked about the Baldwin and the fire next time. Our brother Simeon talked about the mandate of heaven. He may not have used that term, but there are people who have the mandate of heaven. Maybe Bernard can tell us about that because he's a good acolyte and he understands Christian theology. But it's that Christian theology that says also that God is not mocked. God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. Remember that? God is not mocked. I rest my case.
Let's take a quick word from Bernard Bilambi. We really have to go to you, but Bernard is here waiting. Bernard, let's take a word from before we go over to Lambi.
Well, gentlemen, first of all, apologies. I was hoping to be on the show earlier, but as you can imagine, several moving parts on the ground and several strategic meetings and discussions and so forth. So I'm a bit delayed coming in on the tail end. But what can I say about this that you guys have not delved into? I guess I can give maybe a brief report from the ground. You know that the opposition parties and forces in terms of civic organizations, civil society organizations, we are rallying together to put together what the best response we can to this. We, of course, believe that the elections are illegitimate. They may be legal. Now that, as was being discussed, is up for discussion, and it's a nuanced point, but we certainly believe that they are illegitimate on the ground of not representing the mandate of the people or the true will of the people in terms of who we select to govern us. And that is the sort of psychological legitimacy, even beyond elections, that a government needs to be viewed as legitimate and to govern effectively. And so we certainly believe that these elections are illegitimate, and we're doing all that we can to marshal the forces. Now, certainly we cannot, and we've been said many times, we cannot afford to be painted as the bad guys here. We cannot afford to be painted as hooligans, nor can we be painted as the folks that the Skerrit can point his fingers to and say, here are the bad guys. These are the folks preventing you from exercising your electoral, your constitutional right to cast a vote. So we will prevent that. We will not allow that to happen. At least we will try our best. Things do happen, but that's not our position. Is to maintain the moral high ground, because at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what can we really win in this situation? We understand the reality, hard-nosed reality of the situation. It's likely with this tilted playing field and this setup that Roosevelt Skerrit has built a field that works for him. It's very difficult to unseat him in that situation. So participating in that simply makes it legit. You know, we put a stamp of approval on this, and we refuse to do so anymore. But beyond that, we normalize this for our population, for our young people, that says that this is okay, that such behavior, such unethical behavior is okay, and we no longer wish to participate in that. And so we recognize that December 6th is probably not going to be a day when we can prevail at the polls, given the setup, given the amount of time that we have to get our message out there, and the rogue nature of these elections. But there are other victories we can secure, and that is what I think we as coalition forces, we as those who oppose the government, need to seize upon. We can certainly win the moral argument. We can certainly win the emotional argument. We need to get our people rallied behind us to say, you know, we want and demand electoral reform, and we want to see fresh elections take place under those conditions sooner rather than later, in the next year, in the next few months. December 6th to me is not a day of election, but a day should be seen as a day of liberation, because what has happened is this draconian move has forced the opposition forces to truly come together, to truly get our act together, and to become unified behind that agenda of liberation, that agenda of mobilization, that agenda of putting together a platform to once and for all rid ourselves of this big stone in the road that's blocking national progress. That's obvious to everyone that these guys are blocking national progress. And so it is not a day of mourning necessarily. It should be a day of celebration as well, because finally we are putting together this sort of coalition, this sort of organizational capacity, this sort of long-term strategic plan to unseat this government. And so that is the intention that that's the journey we embark upon, is to get on with the job to be done. Nomination day is one thing, election day is another thing. That's Skerrit's thing. Skerrit has called his snap election. He has set a nomination date. He has made it about him and his party and consolidating his power in his party. That's his thing. We do not wish to participate in his things anymore. And so those dates, while nominally important to us, are irrelevant. Our real objective is to get on with the job of unseating this government and to do the work that it takes to rally and mobilize the people, to get our message out there, to keep pressing on, and to do the hard work that needs to be done and should have been done. And now this galvanizes the emotional energy and the emotional fuel that we need to get after it. And so Skerrit has set himself up for his demise, because now the people are ready. The leadership is certainly ready. The coalition has congealed, and we're ready to get on with the work. So again, we will do all we can. We truly believe that since these elections are illegitimate, in our view, as I explained earlier, they should not occur. We believe that. We believe this election should not occur without reforms. But that does not necessarily translate into a desire to disrupt these elections, because, as we said, that's a scary thing, and we're no longer of that mindset. We're no longer participating in these games. We're not going to play and run around and burn things and make him believe that somehow we're playing into his hands. They say he plays chess, we play checkers. Well, we reject that theory, and now we're ready to engage the intelligence that is amassed against him to do things right. And so that is the long-term goal, and that is what this coalition is striving to put together. a plan to replace this government. The other things are political theater and necessary, but we are not planning of the mindset of disrupting these elections. We are no longer playing this game. We're simply letting Skerrit play with himself and get on with his shenanigans. But we plan to be more mature than him around this time around.
Well, thank you for that update, Bernard. Bernard is the political leader of the Dominica Freedom Party, who's a firm part of that coalition. I think it's called the Election Reform Coalition. Sounds like a nice name, but I'll tell you what I found, just to endorse what Bernard is saying. I found that since this coalition was formed, there was a fundraiser, a radiothon, and what I found is quite a while I've seen different people from all walks of life, all over the place, Dominicans overseas, just going into the website and just making a donation. It seems to me that there is some kind of a groundswell taking place. It probably has not reached a peak yet, but certainly there seems to be some kind of groundswell on the outside, at least. Bernard can tell us more about what's happening on the ground, because what we're going to be talking about once we let Lambie, open the lines, we're going to talk about the whole question of that snap election and what should Dominicans do, because we want to talk about action. People want to know what is the Bernard has started telling us what the coalition is doing. And it's good that the coalition is meeting and all parties are getting together in a cohesive way. It's a while there we had not seen that in Dominica. So it seems as the decision of the DLP administration and Prime Minister Skerrit to call the snap election without the electoral reforms against the best advice of Sir Dennis Byron, of the CCJ, of the OAS, of the UN, of the CARICOM, and everybody else, including, most importantly, all of the local groups and civic organizations that got together and said, here is a report to the Electoral Commission. This is what we're looking for. I think that may have been an error, because it has galvanized the opposition forces and civil society to act with one voice to try to put an end to this thing that has been going on. So we're going to go and take go over to Lambie. Let Lambie see if we can give the people the numbers, and let's make some calls. And then when we come back, we're just going to throw out the discussion, because we no longer want to be, acting as though we have to be making speeches. We're not doing any interviews now. We're going to just have conversation with each other about the whole question of that that snap election and what it is that Dominicans should be doing about it to preserve their democracy. Lambie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me apologize to the caller who's been waiting for a while. We'll be with you shortly. Just stand by. You're listening to and viewing the Global View in Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Let me give you all those numbers again. 449-3095, 96 and 97, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. There's a call on the line. Let's listen to this caller. Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Lambie. Good evening to the panel.
Evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Boy, I don't know. I'm going to be devil's advocate tonight. Gabo, I'm glad you took it across the pond. I'm glad and you involved the conversation of beloved. I'm glad Simeon took it and talked about the heavenly esteem in your own words in some ways. But all of the conversation and the expressions that we're given, they aim at a side. They aim, let's say, well, let us just call it, they aim at that scary side, that power and that evil. Brothers, I know there are sisters here tonight, but brothers, there are sometimes in struggle when we need to critique our beloved. We need to critique our beloved. We need to critique our beloved. And it is critical. You know why it is critical? Because we have a pattern in Dominica. We have a pattern of flaws. I've been in touch with this country over the last 2 weeks in a really intensive way. And I'm telling you, and Mr. G talked about the strength externally. We have crossed all lines, all political lines, put aside all our differences, and we've worked on making sure there's an international swell towards Dominica. You know what is sad? is the people on the ground cannot put aside their political differences in this critical 11th hour. Brothers, we have to critique our beloved. We have to critique our beloved. We keep talking like it's the devil on one side. There's demons on both sides.
Thanks a lot.
Demons on both sides. And I would love for the intellects to start doing a more spherical critique at this hour. It is critical because we have a dysfunctional organization on the ground, bro. People are disconnected. There is no real structure on the ground to move struggle. There is no, you know what I mean? It's just absence. We have a radio organization, but we do not have a functional organization on the ground. You feel me? And we need to, this fronting, it has to stop at this 11th hour. We have to critique our beloved. Peace and blessings, brothers.
Thank you for your contribution. You know, hold on. All ideas are welcome. I mean, you know, we welcome all ideas, and certainly thank you. Lambi, do you have any other call holding? If you don't, then let's go over to Simeon.
Yeah, but I just have to ask a question, Mr. Gregor, and panelists that come to mind, because it takes. Let's step back a little. It takes some time for a political party to prepare for an election, to have posters, to select candidates, to source audiovisual equipment, sound and lights, to get the necessary T-shirts and materials for an election. People say this has been a snap election. Now, I question to a very large extent the impartiality of Sir Dennis Byron in that regard. Because the question that I must ask is, if you issue a letter on the 6th of November, how does 2 days give the Labour Party government time to bring in posters, T-shirts, have stage light and sound, and everything needed for an election? If you notice, the election is in high gear. This was not a snap election. And I would dare say in this program tonight that there must have been collusion between Sir Dennis Byron and the Dominica Labour Party, alerting them to the fact, because you cannot tell me that in such a short space of time, the Dominica Labour Party has been able to bring forward so much of electioneering organization and products for the production of the election campaign. Somebody has to answer that question for me.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? Because they seem to have been very well prepared in anticipation of this snap election. And it takes a few months to get posters of even candidates. These things were not printed in Dominica. We are launching the new candidates this week. And it means that for their pictures may have already been sent to Barbados for design and printing long before the 6th of November.
Well, all of that may be so, but I mean, that is quite clear, but I have not been able to verify that, in fact, there was that collusion between Sir Dennis Byron and the government or the Prime Minister. I have no way of verifying.
Well, you may play your disclaimer for Q95, but I am prepared to stand by my observation.
But that's fine. But I'm only saying that I have no way of verifying that. Dr. Andre, you wanted to continue?
Yes. Let me say this. I mean, Simeon has a point, quite frankly. But Simeon's point, in my view, is further evidence as to the need for constitutional change directed to the fact that election dates should be fixed, thereby giving everyone a equal playing field to prepare for it in advance. But with the Prime Minister having the discretion to call it whenever he chooses, then he can engage in the type of activity that Simeon is talking about. So that is clearly evidence of someone who may have no interest in free and fair elections, manipulating the situation to give himself or his party an unfair advantage. And that's exactly where we are. In terms of your last caller's point, he laments that the forces, the patriotic forces, are not sufficiently critiqued. Well, let me tell him, last time I checked, Rome was not built in a day. Every voyage begins with one step. We cannot expect overnight, in the face of a response or in response to this emergency, that automatically an association, well healed, well functioning, will just come up overnight. These things have to be built. And quite frankly, in my view, given what I've heard, they are certainly moving towards a situation where there can be unanimity of purpose. But we cannot wave a magic wand for that to happen. We have to understand that there will be political differences and challenges on the ground. We have to understand that initially everyone will not sing with the same hymn book.
Correct.
And if we analyze what happened in 79, we'll see that, quite frankly, many of the persons who took to the streets under the banner of the president did not necessarily share all the objectives of some of those who led the struggle. So that I am not in the business of engaging in so-called critique that, quite frankly, demoralizes, that diminishes any person who has a genuine concern for taking action to protect their livelihood. I am more interested in ensuring that they overcome whatever differences they have with those who are joined in the same holy, in the same ambition to set the ship of state right. So that I'm not going to engage in any critique. I'm not in a classroom, you know.
Correct.
I'm not in a classroom, Gaso. You have to tolerate the fact that people have differences, people have different strengths, right? And as long as they can be meshed into one overarching goal, which they can all agree, that is what we have to foster. There will always be differences, my friend.
Correct.
You know? And if we engage, we start picking and choosing and we start picking apart, what do we do to the cause of freedom? We're diminishing it. So I'm not going to engage in any kind of academic critique. Come CD, we say, oh, professor, I'm in a classroom. No, I will give all the support, just as Zed, quite frankly, has done in terms of raising funds to bring buses loaded, hopefully, with people to express their opinion in a free and fair fashion. But let me sound the warning to those of us in the diaspora, because that's where am I right now, to be quite frank with you. Let us be humble when we approach the table of brotherhood. Let us speak in a fashion that shows respect and tolerance and appreciation that there could be differences. Let us try to move the ship forward as opposed to have it anchor at a place where nothing is achieved. I'm not suggesting that anyone is doing that. I'm just suggesting let us be concerned that this is not a necessary consequence of what we say or what we do.
Correct.
That is what I have to say.
Let me just add something to that. Those of us who know anything about 1979 would probably say that this coalition is coming together much faster than it did in 79. It did not happen overnight. And then you had different kinds of players. I mean, the situation was different. Remember, there was a man called Zapoka who had complete control over the workers at the port. If he said the port not working, the port not working. Remember that time the Civil Service Association was controlling, I think, the teachers, the nurses, all the public officers, everybody. Today, you have so many different institutions. Everything is broken up into parts. I mean, again, the messing up of all of the institutions that support the democracy. This is what has happened, and now we are facing that. So I think, given the circumstances, I would say that these groupings that I see forming, and Bernard reported to us so eloquently here tonight, I think they're making good progress. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's happening, and that is a very good thing. And what I see happen is that I see some of the people in the diaspora are rallying to the assistance of that coalition and contributing towards the finances of the coalition. That is a good side. Lambi, you wanted to take a call. Just interrupt us anytime. Just give me a sign.
Yes, the caller's been waiting patiently. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. I'm listening to the discussion and it's very enlightening and I'm being educated. But the caller in the diaspora, I want to tell him that he needs to be on the ground to feel the adrenaline of the people, the pulse of the people, that at this time, this election calling on December 6th is immoral and it's not godly. Because right now, as we speak, people in Pidifuye is cut off from the basic of some of their utilities, the access to a normal life. And you want to ask these people to vote you in? That is immoral. Also, too, I know certain businesses that's going to close at 2 p.m. to allow their workers to go and do what the Constitution asks them to do, stand up for their human rights and civil rights. So the caller from the United States are calling in. The groundswell is happening, okay? And we're going to let the government know that the people power will prevail. Good evening.
And good evening to you, and thanks for your country. Lambi, you want to take another call?
Yes. I think we lost that call.
Would you like to give the numbers out again, Lambi, and then let's see if we can take a couple calls before we move on. Go ahead, give her the numbers.
The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we're taking your calls right now.
Okay, so if you don't have a call, we'll just go ahead and just interrupt us when you want. But Dion, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I do. I just want to say how much I want to give respect to Bernard Ito to join the coalition. I know Bernard long time, and Sheridan, he might not have told that to you, but Bernard is the first person to teach me about computers. He really did. And I really want to give some kudos to him. So having said that, I also want to say something else. When people have to fight for their civil rights, it's never easy. Go ahead.
Let's take a call. I'm sorry, Dion. Let's take a call, Lambi.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Lambi. Good evening to the panel, gentlemen. Good evening to all.
Evening.
Mr. Simeon Joseph, you mentioned something, and I have a follow-up question to what you mentioned, with the fact that how long did Sir Dennis Byron give Kerry the information? So my question is to have to be asked is, at what point in time did Kerry receive the information? Because like you rightly said, you can never put all these organized things together to run an election in 2 days. It can never happen. So the question so Dennis Byron have to come out and answer right now to know, to put the Dominican's mind at ease, is when did he give Kerry the information? Because definitely he did not receive it on December 6th. Have a good night, gentlemen. I'm listening.
And thank you for your comment. But what I wanted to say about that is Dennis Byron the problem that we have the Dominic has to deal with now, or is this sham what do you call it? You call it the election. This is what I think Dominic and the concerned themselves. What are they going to do about it? That is our question. We're saying this snap election that has to be addressed. I'm not so sure addressing Dennis Byron is going to give us a fix. I think I prefer what is happening with the coalition. When I hear Bernard reporting on the action that they're taking on the ground, to my mind, that is where Dominicans need to address themselves to how everybody can contribute to that, and we can have a successful action. Lambi, you wanted to take a call before I go to Dion?
Yes, we have another call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. This is the boots on the ground.
Evening.
It's a cry that I've been out for a few years now, that the only way we can have a solution in Dominica is for the people to take a stand, a peaceful stand. One of the things I say in terms of what we have presently, based on 1979, we had members of the Labour Party that had identified the problem that the government had, and there was members that decided to defect from the party. I remember J. Serafin at the time, who was one of the first members that resigned, At the end of the exercise, O.J. Serafin was the chosen one to take the people through until we had general election. When we had general election and then voted the Freedom Party. I've been saying for a number of months now, is a while now, that based on where we were, knowing that we had 2 years to the election, I called the Labour Party to give Rayburn Blackmore, who was the Minister of Security at the time, to deal with the issues so that we could have him with the respect of the people put in the electoral position so that we would have a new electoral platform prepared for the election 2 years later. But Roosevelt Skerrit is so disrespectful and cunning that he makes sure he had Rayburn Blackmore put his balls in a plastic and remove it from his body in order that he
Look, we really don't need to go there. We don't need to go there, Carlo. We don't need to go there. You can do better.
Are you hearing me?
Yeah, but I'm saying you don't need to go there in the kind of, all that talk language.
Yes.
You don't need that. You can do better.
There's a police officer that calls the radios constantly and talking about the reason why we should have the election and how legitimate it is. But he must understand that they plotted to take Blackmore down. They plotted to put him under the bus in order that he could never even raise his head to surface, to be able to say that this is my legacy. I did something despite the problems that I had. I did something to help the people of Dominica get to the front. Because I yet to believe that Rayburn Blackmore did agree to just step out of the political realm and to allow these young people to take over him when he had the experience. And right now he leaves his security in the hands of younger people to deal with. So I believe we must stand up and allow this election to fail in order that Dominica get itself on the right foot. And people like Blackmore, I am still waiting to hear before the hour that he would be able to tell the people of Dominica, I am standing on your side. Because
Thank you so much, caller. I think that Mr. Raymond Blackmore, his English is a lot better than mine. I'm sure that he can speak for himself, and when he's ready, maybe with the public will hear from him. My focus, as I said, gentlemen, here tonight.
Yes, and not only that, Mr. Gregoire. I'm going to say a statement. I think it's a bit hypocritical for people who criticize the stepping down of Blackmore and Ostry from the political scene now. These people should have been out of politics long ago because they are distaste to the political system and governance in Dominica. We have been asking for years for Ostry to step aside because of his derogative tongue, and Mr. Blackmore because of all the criminal things that have been leveled against him. Now they have stepped down. We should rejoice and say good riddance to them. Okay? Because we cannot be, for the past 3 years, saying these people are not fit to be in government, and now we want to come up with some politically technical term to say, well, okay, they were cast aside. Thank God Dominica has been rid of people like Reginald Ostry and Rayburn Blackmore from the landscape of the governance of this country. And I hope that it is not a smokescreen or camouflage for them to come back in some other way as the other ministers who have gone before. I wish we have seen the back of those things. But when, one of the things we have to look at, Mr. Gregoire, in talking about that is, let us not forget, there's a phone call.
Yes, Lambi, let's take a call.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Hey, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. Just two quick things. I learned that from a technique that a Labour Party insider explained to me how things, the Skerrit has gotten away with a lot of stuff over the years. Basically what it is, they said the Dominican people, what they do, they go on the radio, they do a little thing for about 7 to 9 days. They blow a lot of steam. I stay quiet, and then it dies down and nothing happens. I hope that's not that what. I hope it's going to be different this time. And then, secondly, I kind of disagree slightly with Simeon's strategy. In a sense, we should be joyful that some of those people have stepped down, but we need inside collaboration with some of those people that are dissatisfied with the decision of Skerrit right now. So I think opposition people should make attempts to reach out for those people to come out publicly to show their dissatisfaction with what's going on. People like Austri and Rayburn and so on. We need everybody on board. So if there is internal turmoil, I think we have to reach out to those people.
Well, I think if God has purged us of impurities, we must not mix our clean wine with impurities. You don't take old wine and put into new wineskins. You want new wineskins where you can be pure. And that is my position. We can do without them. And, that is why I would say, now, I have never been an admirer of the Dominica Freedom Party, for the simple reason that in my own personal family history, I'm been victims of the Freedom Party. But one of the things I'll say about the Dominica Freedom Party as it has transitioned over the time is that the Dominica Freedom Party now is a pure party. It has been able to scale itself of all the impure opportunists that were hanging on to the party since in the days of Patrick John. And so you must admire them now. And for the Freedom Party to be where it is now, almost at the bottom of the ladder of political parties in Dominica, and to remain with people with pure intent, like people like Mr. Johnson Boston, who has held on with integrity over the years, and Mr. Ito, because I've been listening to these people. And so sometimes that is necessary. So when we're talking about forces coming together, I think we now have an amalgamation of pure forces, because we have a Freedom Party wing that is genuine and honest and has a legacy of promoting good governance and good politics, mixed up with people in the immediate opposition who want to work together for the good governance of this country. And I think a new day is dawning in the politics of Dominica, because after 22 years of that decrepit type of leadership and governance that we have been through, of lies, of deception, of empty promises, of unholy alliances, okay, of all the heights of deception and maneuverings and bribery and treating and all those kind of things there, what we need now, what Dominica needs now, is a purifying force. And so in the midst of this opportunity that this current leader of the country and the Dominica leader has placed upon us, we are now seeing an amalgamation of pure intent, so to speak, whereby those people who really want to come together, and it doesn't have to be homogeneous, as Zed is saying. We don't all have to be of like quality. We have to be of like-mindedness. And the like-mindedness that we must march towards is integrity and justice and good governance and administration and the well-being of Dominica. So all who can come on board must come on board. And we don't know, the time for opportunists is gone. The time for juxtaposing yourself because you want to be part of a ruling class of people just for your own personal gain is coming to an end. And that is the light we are seeing at the end of the tunnel. This past 22 years that we have been through, this darkness of corruption and taintedness and poor governance and poor administration and a declining economy is giving way to the remnant of the Freedom Party that is pure and untainted and has withstood the test of time, because all the corrupt opportunities of the Freedom Party have gone into this current Dominica Labour Party. Okay, and all the opportunities of the Labour Party has gone to in this Labour Party. So all those now who want to stand for what is pure, what is right, what is just, are now coming together. And hopefully, because of this opportunistic judgment of this current leader, who thinks that he can abuse his power and use the law to his advantage, is beckoning those who want to see things done right to come together. And that is what we need to do tonight. We need to rally everybody
You're
to come
quite
together,
right.
wherever you are,
Exactly.
and march.
Exactly.
Stand for what is right. Stand for what is just. Stand for what is truthful. And we call on people in the public service, in the churches, in the business sector, the youth of Dominica, all those. So we don't need Mr. Blackmore anymore. We don't need Reggie Osh, because putting those people in there is putting vinegar in pure wine. And we need to get rid of them and move forward as a united force with integrity, as a united force. And if the Mr. Ito doesn't have to become a UWPite. Let him remain. And what they have to do is, if they come together for the good of the country, and for instance, the UWP enters in government tomorrow, they must have that bullseye at the foot and the heels of the UWP to say, listen, guys, I'm going to keep the fire at your heels so that we have good governance in this country, which is what we have been lacking for a while. And lastly, Mr. Greg, I find it very ironical, because 1979 was mentioned, that the champions of democracy and good governance of 1979 are now at the helm of governance in this country, promoting and supporting and preventing the very things that they fought for and against in 1979. And that is the lesson I think we have to teach them. I think we must come full speed around.
Let's take a call from Lambi.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Good evening. I love all you. Mr. Simeon, you are right. They're not just leaving, but I know, I have a strong belief they get set to leave. They have to ask God forgiveness, and we should not ask them to come and tell us what can we do. They should volunteer on their own and come and save Dominica, like all this sacrifice you all are doing. Everybody putting everything on the line to save Dominica now. And if they are Dominicans with a pure heart, if they don't like scary what he did to Dominica or what he's doing to Dominicans, they need to volunteer on their own. They can help to tumble him down, but I don't think we should go and boom fly them, because they themselves, Satan can correct sin. They themselves are the ones that caused us to be how we are today. God bless all you. Mr. Simeon, you are right.
Thank you. Thank you, caller. Dr. Andre, I think what we're doing here tonight, right, is that we're saying let's focus. You know, there is an action taking place on the ground. Bernard has given us an eloquent update on what is happening. I think what is happening on the ground is moving a little faster than what I saw happen in 1979.
Yes.
The circumstances were different, the conditions were different, the players were different. You'd never had a government like this for 22 years that's behaving the way it's behaving. If all the institutions have been broken up, that was not the case in 1979. The DIC and all these institutions were intact, thinking straight, right? And these people wanted to follow the democracy. They wanted the government to play its role as simply creating the enabling environment for business to prosper, to create growth and jobs and exports and so on, and income, and help to improve people's living standards and quality of life. The business community, but now we find the government is employing everybody and telling everybody how they must live and when they must talk, when they can't talk. I think our focus has to be, and I'm looking for your guidance and some of your advice on this, Dr. Andre, what it is that Dominicans everywhere can do to support what is going on in Dominica with this coalition to help to preserve the country's democracy and the human rights of its residents and the civil liberties of Dominicans. That is what I think we should do, to see how everybody can, because it is not something against the government, it is something for democracy, for human rights, for civil liberties, and for a better living standard and quality of life of the people of Dominica, which they have not been enjoying for the past 20 years. Dr. Andre.
I agree. The fact of the matter, in terms of moral crisis, we have to decide on whose side we're on. The fact of the matter is that at no time in our history has any leader of any political directorate, be in control of so much money, money which is not in the consolidated fund. The control over that money has enabled him to do a number of things which, quite frankly, are patently illegal. Non-competitive bids in terms of government contracts, in terms of the building of an edifice on King George V Street, in terms of the dispensing of largesse to cronies, in terms of using money donated by NGOs to alleviate suffering in Dominica being only directed towards those who support the cause. The fact of the matter is, what is happening is unprecedented in Dominica's history, and that has been the source of the entrenchment of the political directorate, because people have been bought hook, line, and sinker. That is the unfortunate reality. Some pastors prefer to drive an air-conditioned four-wheel SUV than preach a gospel of truth to power. Some others, they betray the cause, even their own family members, by groveling to the political directorate. No opposition will prosper without funding. And that is why, in my respectful view, the diaspora has a great role to play. That is why, in my view, we have to create the space for the unity to thrive. We have to create an environment where the seeds of unity germinate. We have to water that tender sapling so that it can spring forth and bear root. Yes, as I said, there may be differing voices, but that is not unique to the Dominica situation. There'll always be different voices whenever you have people involved in a common enterprise. Some might want accra for breakfast, others might want bakes. That is just the nature of what we are talking about. But if everyone is brought to the table on those issues that unite them, that is what we should try to foster. Keeping an eye on the prize. What is the goal? We may have different ways of achieving that goal, but we all believe that the goal is what binds us, and we focus on that goal. Then this is basically what we would like to have. We're not asking everybody to silence whatever different voices that they may have, differing opinions. It's like speaking to a jury. There might be different paths to be taken to reach a verdict. But as long as we are united on that verdict, that is what we seek. You may approach the verdict in a different way than this jury or that juror. But as long as you're unanimous that this is the goal that is required at this critical juncture, then that is what we have to hope for. There has never been a movement, an organization, where everyone agrees with everything that is proposed. But we have to develop the maturity to realize that we may differ on things which are, quite frankly, not exactly essential to the goal that we are seeking to achieve. And this is the role we must play. We all bring different strengths to the table. Some of us may be able to donate more than others. Some of us may be able to organize better than others. Some of us may be able to peel potatoes. But we all have to bring together into that one pot of unity all those strengths which can add value to the enterprise and which can further the goal that we are seeking. But the initial task is to build that unity. And it seems to me, based on what I've heard, that quite frankly, there's been significant developments in that regard. I may have some quibbles or quabbles, but again, in my view, now is not the time to show that Andrew knows a lot of things. Now is the time to say, look, let the folks develop the approach. Let them develop the speed with which this train is moving, and let me see what limited role I can play in the movement of that train. That is the approach, in my respectful view, that we must take. Because if we start picking fights, if we start pointing fingers and so on, we nibble at the apple of unity to such an extent that, quite frankly, there'll be nothing left on the table. So let us support as best as we can. Let us critique in a very positive fashion, but let us support the movement, because quite frankly, we have no option. And the point of the fact of the matter is, we are in the diaspora. Well, I'm talking about myself. We're not on the ground. We have to rely on our brothers and sisters in Dominica to do the right things. We have to try to influence them to do the right things. And we have to try to assist them financially to do the right things. Because that juggernaut of money, we can never match it. We can never compete with it. So we have to dig deep and put on the table the little that we can. If we can't do that, we have to support in other ways.
Right.
But one thing we can't do is to stay silent. And then, well, let me leave it at that.
Lambi, you were trying to get us to take a call.
Yes, and the call of the line. Let me just take this caller.
Yeah,
Caller,
good-
please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening to you and your panel.
Evening.
I've been following this program from the time it began, and what I observe, I'm from St. Joseph, Dominica. I live in Houston, Texas, and I'll tell you. The bright minds of Dominica cannot fix Dominica. Prime Minister Skerrit, he's preying on the ignorance of Dominica. It's the ghetto boys and who in the street is those people there that giving him the port to what he's doing. You all could talk from me. Whatever you all talking very good is very good. You know, lesson people could listen and learn a lot from you all guys. But you are not the mask. And I'm saying is that unless Dominicans don't get rid of a thing they call a bobo, not a soil, you know. The bobo is scary. And it's the locals have to get rid of him. We can never go nowhere in Dominica.
All right, caller, do you have a suggestion you'd like to make? What do you think is the best way of doing that?
Well, the best way of doing that, we pray, we march peacefully, we do all kind of things in a decent way. There must be a revolution. We have to step up and fight. We have to fight. The police do nothing for us. The judges do nothing for us. The prime minister do nothing for us. And as Mr. Simeon Joseph said, you don't take bad grapes and put in good grapes. You cannot involve those guys to reform Dominica because they're already spoiled, they're already corrupt. We have to be militant, get out on the streets and force this government out of power. Otherwise, we ain't going nowhere. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for your suggestion. I'm happy to see that people are calling and expressing and having their suggestions. It's all good. I mean, this is what it's all about. I don't think I heard Bernard say or anybody from the coalition group say that they were trying to bring anybody like Austria or Blackmore, anybody into the coalition. I didn't hear that at all. So I'm not so sure where that is coming from.
Well,
I think one caller called and said something about that, but I don't think that is coming from where I'm hearing from. What I know, the people that have been in touch with us, let me tell you what I'm going to say now. And I'm glad that Dr. Andre mentioned it. What we have to function. See, if we're looking to preserve our democracy and our human rights and our civil liberties through free and fair elections, right? Under rules that creates a level playing field. This is what we have to fight for. And I think there's a group in Dominica that is doing that now. They're on the ground, they're working. You have to work with what is happening on the ground. The people are working, give them the support. I know there's people in New York who are organizing lunches or barbecues or whatever it is and doing fundraising. This is the right way to go. I think the group started a fundraiser on Thursday afternoon and a radiothon, and people contributed, and people are continuing to go onto the website www.nidclf.org. nidclf.org. That is where they're asking everybody to go and make a contribution. People have been doing that, and that is how people can go and put the little that they have. They may not be big organizers, they may not be able to do all kind of things, but certainly they can put a little $5 or $10 or $50 or $100 now and then, whatever they can do, contribute that, because as Dr. Andre is saying, you're fighting against a giant with a lot of money, but the people, the ordinary people on the ground are making the effort. And you have a David and Goliath situation, but if the people organize, I think they do well. So
yes, but Mr. Gregoire, and to the rest of the panel, Mr. Ito, I see maybe you have been part of one of the salient considerations that we may not have considered tonight is this, that nomination day is Friday. The opposition parties have stated they're not participating. To the best of my knowledge, as far as the Constitution and the electoral laws are concerned, if the Labour Party goes ahead and nominates 21 persons on Friday by 5 o'clock and no one is contesting, then they are duly elected. It means, therefore, come 6 o'clock on Friday night, we have the Dominica Labour Party back in power. That's a major consideration. And so the question that has to be asked is, and there is precedence, let us not forget Jamaica in 1983, the People's National Party did not contest. There's precedents all around the world where parties have not contested elections. But the question is, have we done the research where parties have not contested elections to see what has been their position? Opposition parties have not contested elections to see what has been their positions when they did not contest election. And the question we have to ask is, should we legitimize or delegitimize the nomination process on Friday? And subsequently, if by de facto situation that nobody is nominated, I think Newton and perhaps Marigot have heard of independent candidates, that by virtue of the fact that they might be duly elected, how does one delegitimize? Because you will have a situation where the government can say, okay, you had an opportunity to run and you did not run, so we've been duly elected. Or you also have the converse situation where if parties decide to participate and they win, they can still celebrate a victory by saying, well, we contested an election and we won.
Yeah.
The question
let
is...
Let me address some of that, Simeon.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, thank you.
Good idea. I think
so. Yes, we are fully aware that if the Labour Party puts in the 21 candidates and no one else does, then they become duly elected per the law and will be sworn in within 20, subsequently as a new government. But what we have to ask ourselves is, so what? What does that fundamentally change between the 18 seats that the Labour Party has now and let's say 21 seats that the Labour Party wins?
Right.
The Labour Party has more than enough votes to do any constitutional change that they want.
Right.
The Labour Party, with this snap elections and this tilted playing field and no electoral reforms and no time for us to get our messaging out there, may very well do at least 18 seats, and that is just the political realities that we're dealing with.
Right.
So in essence, there is no essential difference between that and that. But what it does do, and I am all for a pure play, my personal position, my party's position is a pure play. We do not participate in any way in these elections. We do not put up candidates. We do not put up shadow candidates. We keep it pure. We play it ethical. We do what we say that we're going to do. Let Roosevelt Skerrit and the Labour Party have the election by themselves. We do not wish to play this game anymore. We are on a different program. Our program is to build a coalition, to build leadership that shows the country we are the next government. When I say we, I'm talking about a coalition movement. We are the next government to rule this country. Let us build our organizational capacity. Let us build our fundraising capacity. Let us demonstrate to the country that there's leadership at play that is a much better alternative than Roosevelt's carry. Let us win the hearts and minds of Dominicans. Let them see that we have sunk so low into this process that now we have 21 seats won by this government and we are not participated. We can win this moral victory. We can win the psychological victory. We can bottle this emotional energy to ignite the people into a movement and give ourselves time to get our organization together. That is a ploy, hard-nosed politics that can win. Anything else like playing silly games, like sending candidates here and so on, will only result in a quasi-election where Roosevelt Skerrit wins 21 seats against weak candidates, because we know political people like the United Workers' Party and so forth will not support an independent candidate. So mathematically, it's almost guaranteed that he will win 21 seats in a contested election, which loses the moral high ground, loses the emotional energy, and doesn't change the conversation in Dominica. It would be, I'm glad the party won, they beat people again, same thing. But if we can change the conversation to no participation whatsoever, it's a whole new interesting dialogue and conversation and a bottled emotional juice for us to do something with. And that is what the victories that we can win and what we must go for.
I am glad you said so, but I think that has to be articulated, because that moral argument, to my mind, needs to transcend to the population. You understand what I'm saying?
But that's
and what you stated there tonight must echo through the ears of the political observers and the people in Dominica who want to hear something from the people who have said they will not participate in an election. Because to my mind, that case must be made.
I agree
that
with you.
That case must be made with the Dominican population. And to my mind, it has not yet been made, if you understand what I'm telling you. So we have to sell that.
Simeon, I have to say, I agree with you. In other words,
we have to sell that.
The next
and people must buy into that.
All right.
Yes, we're not just not participating, but we are fighting a moral battle. And that moral battle is that where that moral battle will delegitimize this government even more and gives us the upper plane to decide where we go for the country of Dominica. Mr. Ito, with all due respect, I appreciate what you have said, but I will also say further, I want to pronounce further that this argument has to transcend through the length and breadth of Dominica, so that those people who you are asking to support your non-participation can buy into your reasoning and your logic. And most of all, the people who are living in fear of this government being in total control of this country, that they will be able to have some hope and know that their sacrifice is not in vain. That must be done.
Right. That's right. And that is to come, and that is the strategy. As you can well imagine, though, when you have a coalition building and working on messaging and strategies and timing, it does tend to make the purity and of the execution. But that is necessary. You have to build the trust, the cooperation, and so forth. It takes some time, but the intention is to build that movement, is to broadcast that message fan-wide, and to get on one coherent, targeted message of the moral battle.
I agree. Thank you. So you need to speak more on that.
You see,
you're the person I've heard made the best case.
The only thing I would add to that, Simeon, is that you said getting the message out to every nook and cranny in Dominica, but I think you have to get it out to the diaspora. It's very important for the diaspora to be fully engaged with this message, right? And this
because one of the things I think we have to make, without wanting to dominate the landscape, we have to make the Labour Party look like a fool. In other words, no one is contesting, but these fools are going around having big rallies, having motorcades, spending money, doing all that kind of thing, and basically let it look like they're campaigning against themselves. And we cannot afford to allow them to have a victory by saying they have beaten independent candidates and therefore legitimizing their victory, to give them something to celebrate. In other words, we have to make them look like drunken fools in their own squalor, whereby they spend money, they revel, they campaign, they have motorcades, they have big rallies, only talking to themselves. And I think that has to be the mockery message that has to be sent to them. And in the meantime, let us hope that moving forward, Mr. Ito, I wish to say that message needs to be amplified.
No, I agree. Dr. Dion George, your thoughts on all of that? I think that's a good way to go, and that is the way to go. I think the message, you have to crystallize that message, simplify it, crystallize it in layman's language, get the message across to Dominicans everywhere. Dr. George, your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gregoire. I was saying something earlier on, and I did give some credence to my friend Ito, but the conversation went where I did not get a chance to finish. But what I would say is this, and I think I can just say that as one who sees what is happening, I'm seeing a collision coming forward. And as a scientist, I would like to just give 5 points as to how I know over the world people get these things together. Number one, I like the idea of the collision. Yeah, and that's where I started a while ago, and I didn't get to it, but a collision has to come together. It has to identify itself. I saw that Dr. Thompson Fontaine, that they had a group called something to do with the effect that no electoral
Reform Coalition.
Yes, and so what the first step in terms of winning civil rights is to identify your group and identify itself. The second step is to challenge the society. Somebody might say, but long people just give people money for election. Long people doing that. Now, you have to basically change the status quo. Like what Gabriel left now. And they were saying, what is the use of an injunction? What is the use of a court case? Or what about we can break new grounds. And I heard Simeon mention something about he never supported the Freedom Party. But I will tell him I've always been a Freedomite. But anyway, let me not say that. Yeah. But you have to identify who you are, but you have to challenge the society. Challenge them as to what was wrong and what you want to do. And the third step is to get a cultural story. And the cultural story is, say, for example, the Constitution says the Prime Minister can call election, but if there is a situation where there is electoral reform going on, and perhaps the Prime Minister should wait until that process, as he has promised, let that process finish, and then he just call a snap election. Perhaps that's not fair to the people of the country, and then the people have to stand up, and so that's the cultural story. And then perhaps what would happen is that people from all around the world, the diaspora, would say, well, you know what? I'm not a Freedomite, according to our good friend Simeon, or I'm not a Labourite, or I'm a Labourite. But at least, even if you are Labourite, you could say, for example, man, in all fairness, perhaps the reform should have taken place before the election. At least. And if not, then what happens? And that's what I was alluding to earlier. And if not, then the people really have to take their country. And there are ways to do that. And I was giving some suggestions about that earlier. I recommended the injunction. I recommended writing to the CCJ. I recommended civil disobedience in the best ways. To let the government know, which is, and by the way, constitutionally, that we have the right to protest, we have the right to petition the government, etc., etc. And Mr. Gregoire, that's where my thoughts were. I have some other things to say, but I just felt that we're running out of time. I was looking at the time, and yeah. So
well done, dear. Dr. Andre seemed to have dropped off the minute. Gabriel was supposed to come back, but really, I think we've really run out of time already, as it were. The point is, I like the conversation tonight. We've looked at all of the circumstances, and we came to the harsh reality. There is something happening on the ground. Everybody put their weight behind it to protect the democracy, if we believe in it. I believe in it, to protect our human rights. People shouldn't be afraid to talk in their own country.
No.
You know, and to protect people's civil liberties. Why can't you walk in peace? You know,
Precisely.
come on. I mean, let's if a country gets to a point where you can no longer walk without being harassed or intimidated or victimized, we're on the wrong track.
Exactly.
Where we going? I mean, come on. We're bright people in Dominica. Bright people in Dominica. How can we tolerate that nonsense? So that's the point I'm making here tonight. And I like the fact when something is happening, work with it. I just wish that the group would stick together, be cohesive.
Right.
You're always going to get little frictions here and there. I mean, this is life. But I think in the final analysis is the things that really we have a lot more in common than we have otherwise. And we have to look at the things that we have in common, the common purpose.
Right.
Do that. Let that be the guiding light, the guiding principle. Let the group stay together. What the group is doing now, they're raising funds together. I'm hearing the Electoral Reform Coalition is raising funds. They had a radiothon on Q95. They raised some funds. They can have another one and raise some more funds. They can ask people to continue going to the website, www.nidclf.org. People can do that at any time. They can do that today. They can do that tonight. They can go there right now and put in $100 or $50, whatever they have. This is the spirit of this thing. If you want to contribute in some way, contribute something that is good and righteous and clean and decent. That is going to help to make people's lives better. I do not believe that the majority of the people of Dominica, their lives are better now than they were 20 years ago. I don't think so. Not with all this. I'm not on the ground, Bernard, you're living, you're seeing it every day there now. But the point is, I think we have to empathize with our people. Dominica has so much Dominica is rich with resources, and we've done so much before that we're not doing now. We need to really release the talents of our young people. I see young people are rearing to go. They're doing all kinds of cottage industries and helping themselves, making all kinds of body care products and using the natural resources. Why don't we release that talent, fund them, let them go to the bank and get money and put the ideas and guide them, help them to manage the thing and make their projections and do their costings and so on and help them with their management and their marketing. That is what we should be doing, not telling them you cannot walk. You know, that cannot make sense. I mean, are we going to tell these young people that we're going to just have this thing where the biggest export we're going to have will be young people trying to go to Antigua or St. Martin or New York? How are we going to build our country that way? I think we have to tell our young people, whether they're in the cultural industries or in agribusiness or in manufacturing, whatever field they're in, or in the knowledge industries. I know Bernard likes that field. It's a very lucrative field for young people. You have to tell them you can become a millionaire. There's no reason why one of our artists or musicians or anything else cannot become millionaires. There's no reason why not. The globe is the market. The marketplace is the globe. It's not Dominica. All right. So I think I just want us to end on a very strong note here tonight. Dr. George, let me just get your final closing remarks, because I feel that we've come full circle, and what I think we have all concluded that the best way forward is for people to work together. That is what happened in 1709. People to work together for a common good, a common cause. And this time the cause is democracy and human rights and civil liberties. Free and fair elections, untainted elections. This is the cause. And I think if within the next few days, I'm looking forward, Bernard, to hearing that message that Simeon is told, that message that you so eloquently delivered here for us tonight. Put that in a format and let's hear it being promoted and advertised in every nook and cranny everywhere on all social media, so people at home and abroad, wherever they are, can understand what the fight is all about and what the objective is. So Dr. Dion George, your final closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. And my final remarks is this. I think the purpose for this discussion tonight, I think it was the main theme, the snap election. And so when I studied, I talk about some rationales, perhaps. Why would someone do that? And I heard some statement about they will cut with their pants down and so forth. But that's petty. To me, I think a as a scientist, I would say that is it legal? And some people say, of course it's legal, because the prime minister has the leeway within the constitutional boundary to call election when he wants. I say no. I say we have to put things in context. And I would say, oh, by the way, let me just say something. I read some of the texts people put on Facebook, and someone alluded to the fact that that the CCJ judgment was not a judgment against. They did mention about Dominica should not have election before reforms, and that's not part of a judgment. It was part of the opinion. But you had the good Justice Andre explain what that means, and I just want to talk about it a little bit. What it means, therefore, is that although the substance of the case, which I won't refer to, that the prime minister was not found guilty, etc., that he won the election, but they did give in an opinion, and in a brief is a legal ruling, what is called legal reasoning. The view is that Dominica should really fix these things. And I think we all know, even if you're a labor right, that these things should have happened, that the electoral reform should have been put in place. And I just want to go over what I touched about. How can you have an election where the voters list is bigger than the population? That's ludicrous. And so we have to have IDs. How can you have persons living overseas and come in and vote after 10 and 20 years? And I'm hearing stories of passages being paid. I mean, Dominica looked like an international airport during the last election. I saw 5 planes on the runway. So these are the things that I think, and so Dominica might say, so what? It's not so what. Because there are people who are suffering. There are people who need better health, better food, better homes. And so one of the things I said is what can be done. And in my closing statement, I mentioned some injunction. And this is not anti-government. This is really for good governance. And I think that's the purpose of these programs. And put an injunction to have the prime minister reconsider and say, you know what, let's just do what I said I would do. And if he's so confident and the government is so confident, you know what, let's face man to man. Let me do the reforms and let's deal with it that way. The other thing, if not, I'm not encouraging any violence, but I would really suggest that people use their constitutional right to express their discontent with this snap election. That they would say that, you know, I just don't like that. And that they maybe can protest or use their constitutional right to say this is not right. And the other thing I would say, which I think Bernard Ito and the other party is doing, is say, you know what, if that's the way it is, just let it be. You go ahead. And so the last point I would like to make, I would like to just tell every Dominican, we have reached a red line. We have reached a red line, and that red line is now or never. We have to stop this, and we have to make the right change. And how do we do that? I gave some suggestion. I said about the injunction. I talk about civil disobedience. And so someone says, so if that doesn't work, then what? I am not in the preview to say then what.
No, but by being Bernard answered that question.
Okay, good. Well, Mr. Kretwa, with that being said, I think we had a long discussion tonight. It's getting to 11 o'clock now. And so thank you so much. I just wish Dominica the best, because ultimately this program is for democracy. This program is for good governance and for the well-being of all Dominicans. And that's why I will stay there and stand up 11 o'clock in the night, even though it's raining and snowing. And I would stay there right now.
But you don't sound sleepy, man, Dion, man. So I don't know what you're complaining about. You sound like you're alive and kicking, man. I mean, Simeon, let me go over to you for your final words.
Okay, well, I want to raise 4 main points tonight, okay? And they are thus. Not everything that is lawful is legal, okay? Because when Hitler rose to power. He rose to power on the basis of what was lawful. At one time, it was lawful that black people should not sit in front of a bus. At one time, it was lawful that white people could not, black people could not use the same washrooms and the sinks and enter the same institutions as white people. At one time, slavery was lawful. So it is not because someone acts according to the law, as the Prime Minister has done, that legitimizes what he does. Because not everything is lawful can be legitimized. And history is replete of things that have been lawful that have been illegitimate. So the fact that the law provides for the Prime Minister to call an election, that does not make it legitimate. Because again, history is replete with laws where men have acted in illegitimate ways. And it is illegitimate once it is abusive, once it is taking advantage of privilege, and once it has an oppressive nature, which is what the Prime Minister has done. Secondly, from a social perspective, an economical perspective, there has been the political mantra that the Prime Minister had caught people with their pants down. And the twist on that is this. Not only has the Prime Minister caught the opposition with their pants down, Dominicans are now pantsless, shirtless, skirtless, foodless, and clothless. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, after the 18th of November or the 6th of December, will they have pants, shirts, and shoes and clothes on their backs? Or will they be more naked and exposed economically and socially than they are now? So who will be the laughing stock? The third point I like to make is this, that people have often called on the Catholic Church and the Bishop of the Catholic Church to speak up. And I want to say something tonight in defense of the Catholic Church. The Bishop of Roseau has been the only religious leader in Dominica who has called for electoral reform. The Methodist Church has been silent. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Pentecostal Church, the Anglican Church, the Church of Christ, the Baptist churches, the Jehovah's Witnesses, none of the leaders of these churches have called for electoral reform. And as a Catholic, I am proud that my bishop in 2018 called for electoral reform. And so the question is, what are the other churches doing? But I want to make a call tonight as a Catholic to other Catholics in line with what the bishop has said and the long history of the social teachings of the Catholic Church. And I want to quote, allow me to quote Archbishop Fulton Sheen, one of the most preeminent Catholic bishops of the United States, when he says, quote, "The refusal to take sides on great moral issues is itself a decision. It is a silent acquiescence of evil. The tragedy of our times is that those who still believe in honesty lack fire and conviction, while those who believe in dishonesty are full of passionate conviction." So tonight as a Catholic, I want to call on my other Catholics to come out, to stand up, and to support, because I'm a prominent member enough of the Catholic Church. And that is up to the other non-Catholics to do. The Seventh Days who are silent, the Anglicans, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Church of Christ people, all the pastors in the other churches who are silent and numb. I want to call on Catholics tonight to stand up and take a stand. As Catholics, as all the Catholics in Dominica, in the 12 parishes around Dominica, and the 52 communities in Dominica who are against what is happening, to come out, take a stand, stand for what is right, stand for what is moral, stand for what is just, because the Catholic Church has a long history of Catholic teaching in the name of Pope Pius XII and John Paul II, who taught on communism, and great encyclicals like Popularum Progressio, and letters of the bishops of the Caribbean, like True Justice and Peace for the Caribbean, we have an antecedent of strong Catholic teaching that can beckon us to stand against what we are seeing today. And lastly, on the word of God, I wish to exhort every Dominican and everybody with faith to say that we cannot be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. That we need to be courageous, that our faith should tell us to stand up. And if we say we believe in God, we cannot fear mammon. And because we cannot fear mammon, we have to come out and stand up and say, man can do nothing against me, when we come out and we stand up as people of God on the side of truth, on the side of love, on the side of truth and honesty and justice. So all the Christians who are sleeping, all the 7 days in St. Joseph and Benz who are sleeping, all the Church of Christ people in Marigot and Massac and wherever who are sleeping, all the Pentecostals around Dominica, all the 7 days, all the Methodists from Marigot and Portsmouth and Roseau and the Anglicans. Now it's time to stand up. And the Catholics around Dominica, because I know many Catholics in Dominica do not stand for what is this. And the priests in the Catholic churches who know what is wrong, I ask you today to come out and to show where your worth is. Show where your worth is, because if you don't, it might just be the beginning of a call for Catholics to take a stand like they have done in the past for justice and peace.
And let me just say, Simeon, that I can say for one pastor in his group that I know very well, a gentleman called Pastor Randy Rodney. He is not very silent. He has been working with the coalition, and he has always worked with the groups when they presented the first report for the Electoral Commission for electoral reforms. He's been there. I can speak for him and his group, and I'm pretty sure there might be some others, but you're right. But let's be practical about a couple of things. When we speak about bringing people together to fight a cause, and you speak about 12 parishes, and we ask people to come out, if you need 100 buses, those 100 buses have to be paid for. They cost money. What I'm going to say to all people listening to us tonight, wherever you are, anywhere you are in the world, go to the Nidcliffe website, nidclf.org. Make a contribution. Do it tonight, do it tomorrow, do it the day after, and keep doing it, because these people like Bernardito and Thompson Fountain and all these people who are on the ground, all the political parties and civic organizations that are working, NJAM and CCM and all these people, they have, in order to mobilize people and bring them together, and they are going to have to do it more than once. If you remember 78, 79, you don't do that once. See, that's what happened many times. They're going to constantly require to replenish their resources. They are depending on Dominicans who believe in democracy, who believe in human rights, who believe in free and fair elections, who believe in progress for people. They are depending on you, grassroots people, to create that groundswell of subscribers and contributors. Your little $5, your little $10, your little fee, go into Dominica, drop it in for them. If you're outside in the diaspora, go on to nidclf.org, www.nidclf.org. Hit that donate button, make a contribution, and keep doing that as long as you can. Whatever small amount you can, it does not matter. I believe it will help to pay some buses to get people there and to keep the coalition strong and keep them growing and together and making a difference to stabilize our democracy before it totally gets out of hand. Bernard, I want to give you the final word.
All right, very good. You know, there simply comes a time in every nation's history when we hit certain tipping points, right? We hit a tipping point in 1979. It was a culmination of a lot of social movement, a lot of emotional energy, a lot of discussion, a lot of ideas in the air, and finally it came to a boil in 1979, and it was a tipping point for the nation. It reset many things of the nation. It purified the nation to a large extent, and it reset a period of stability and change. I think that's where we are today. This fight that we are on is not simply a fight for electoral reform, although that's an important part of it. nor is it simply a fight to for this particular election on December 6th, although that's a very important part of it. But this fight that we're in now, this tipping point that we're at now, is really a fight for the soul of Dominica. It really is a fight to define what our island will be as we approach 50 years of independence and what it will be in the next 50 years of independence. This is a defining moment. For all the shenanigans and all the things that the DLP has done and how it has eroded our culture and eroded our democracy and reconfigured our values and destroyed our institutions, in all of this, there's always this resistance. There's always this strata of Dominica that says, no, these are not the values that are Dominican. These are not the values that we represent. This institutional capture is not just. This system of treating and bribery and conditioning and of our youth into a certain behavior is not right. Modeling the sort of behavior that says the only way to make progress in Dominica is to associate with the ruling party and to associate with knowing somebody and getting a handout and having a connection. This degradation of our value system has always been resisted by many of us in Dominica. What is happening now is that strata, the people that believe that there is a better Dominica inside of us, in our psychology, in our minds, in our belief systems, we are saying enough is enough. Now we will not only whimper and complain about it, now we will step up to the front and say, no, we will define what our country will be. We will define what our country looks like. Those values shall not be allowed to be destroyed and pushed over the cliff. We're at the edge of the cliff and we're forming this line, we're holding hands and we say, no, not here, not this time. Our country will not be allowed to be defined as a rogue nation. Our country will not be defined as seated at the table of nations in the rogues' corner. We are a proud people. We are a decent people. We are a good people. And that is what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the definition of what our nation will be. And that is a fight that appeals not just to us on the ground, but to the community of Dominicans around the world. We are a network community now. We are a seamless Dominica globally. And we're fighting for the soul of that network with our headquarters here on Ireland. We are fighting to say we are a prosperous nation. We can become a prosperous nation. We can become a model Black nation. We can do all these glorious things. And instead, we're becoming inglorious bastards. And that is what this fight is all about. We ask every Dominican to join in the fight, not just for electoral reform, but for the fight to reclaim the soul of our island and to do the glorious mission that all of us believe, have always believed in our hearts. We can do great things as a country. We have so much great potential, so many great resources. That is what this fight is about. This fight is about reclaiming, getting back on the path to that destiny, not just electoral reform. It's about defining. It's a pivotal tipping point of how we will define who we are as Dominicans and where we will be in the future. That is the fight and what we're working towards.
Thank you, Bernard. And as we say goodnight, I just want to leave you with this final thought here, that it is really unthinkable that any government anywhere would just take $650,000 plus and throw it away. How can you pay someone that kind of money to do something for you? And when they give you a report that you say you want it and you want to implement, you just disregard it. What happens to that money? So all of that work that went into that, I mean, that money, how is Dominica ever going to recover that? I mean, isn't that unthinkable? It's unfathomable. I want to leave that with you, because when you think about anybody sitting at a desk somewhere and taking the decision, I'm going to call this man and I'm going to engage him in a contract and I'm going to pay him $650,000 to do something for the people of Dominica. I'm going to take their money and give it to him. And then when he comes, he brings the work to me and I say, oh, forget about it. And I just discard it. I throw you the money. Think about that. And that is why I'm saying to everybody, we can do better. There is something happening on the ground. Good, like-minded people are getting together and saying, we think we can do something better in Dominica. We can have something better. Let's go for it. Let's find a way to go. And this group is getting together They need everybody's support. It is the good thing for Dominica. It is a better thing than what we have now, is what they're aspiring to. So if every single Dominican, everywhere at home and abroad, everywhere, please, whatever you do, throw your support behind. It does not matter your religious or political affiliation. It doesn't really matter. Once you love your country, you want a good thing for your country, you want your democracy to thrive, you want your human rights, so you want to be able to speak freely and walk freely in your country and associate freely with who you want to associate with. If you want those rights, then you have to decide, okay, I'm going to support this group that's fighting for those rights right now. Go on the website, nidclf.org. Make a contribution. Good night, everybody. Good night, Bernard. Good night, Dion, Dr. Andre. Was that Simeon? Good night, and Lambi. Thanks for holding on to the console show, and thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Welcome back, Lambi. Good to see you doing well.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Everybody on Facebook is still with us. I'm sorry we didn't even get to acknowledge you. Facebook and YouTube and all the other platforms. I want to say good night and thank all of you for staying with us for the long haul tonight. Thank you, and everyone, have a good night.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by worse and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when this ugly world be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last, freedom at last, so free. Freedom has come. Freedom has come. Oh yeah. Pure heart, sitting in seclusion, and I'm in my meditation, and I can hear the voice of the sufferers cry for justice. Ooh. Another ugly war is a raging, threats of nuclear war is arising, and the world is gripped by fear of mass destruction. I'm saying, when this ugly war be over, and the children can go out and play, I wanna see when all oppression will